Bicentennial.
Well, Jason, it's really inspiring and beautiful place. Tell us where we're at right now.
All right. Well, Artem, spray gunner, and family.
Yes.
Welcome to Bicentennial Art Center in the city of Aurora, which is based in Colorado. This is a ceramics studio, if you will. So even though it's called Bicentennial Art Center, it is primarily a ceramics studio, meaning that we pretty much anything out of clay in here, that's what you're going to do in this studio. The studio offers a variety of classes to the patrons of Colorado. You can sign up and take classes here with a variety of teachers, from hand building, sculpture, clay, wheel throwing, you name it, we pretty much have it here. It's pretty inviting. Let me come on in and I'll show you guys around. How about that?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. So you'll see as you come into the center, you've got, totem pole sculptures. Those have been there for quite a while. Pretty cool and inspiring to me. When I came onto the center, I've been working for the city for, let's see here, 6 years. I just concluded my 5th year here with the center as director of the program. And I started out here in the center as an instructor. So I was finishing up my ceramics degree, if you will, BFA in ceramics. So a teaching degree my whole goal was to be a high school ceramics teacher. I love teaching pottery, and I love teaching an emphasis on technique, if you will. And that was my goal. So I was just finishing up school and I had an opportunity to start teaching here. And I thought, wow, someone wants to hire me to teach pottery classes and I get paid to have fun and play in the mud, as we were talking about. And I was all for it. So I started out here as an instructor. And this place has gone some serious facelift under changes, if you will, under my time, if you will. It started kind of when I first came on board. And as studio tech, I was firing off kilns and everything here in the center, helping assisting making glazes. And I just went from that position to applying for director position, and kind of here we are now. So you're in the center right now at Bicentennial Art Center, the lobby, the front lobby, if you will. Front lobby is just kind of straightforward. It's a front lobby, waiting area, if you will, lockers, storage for students. Usually display cases are filled with instructor work and different things like that. We do a featured instructor every month. I like to show off our instructors as artists because every one of them is a practicing artist, if you will. And we bring a vast variety of what they can do. So, one teacher may be a sculptor, one teacher may be really heavily influenced by raku techniques or something along those lines. So, for us to do is pretty straightforward. This is kind of where our beginning classes take place. It's really equipped with a smaller setting, if you will. I always refer to it as the intimate area because it's smaller, which means you have less wheels. In here you have 8 wheels, you have 9, including this nice big kick wheel. Pottery started out, and it used to be a technique that you use, kicking to happen. Now we're at a technique point where you have electric motors, which are controlled by foot pedals, and it makes things a lot easier to control. But front studio is, equipped with so many wheels. You'll find that there's a lot of wheel throwing classes the center offers, but we also have slab work that'll take place on the slab roller. Behind you, there's a clay extruder. Normally, this shelving unit is full of very large ceramic pieces, which you kind of will see in the back later on. I introduced the studio to throwing very large ware. That's kind of my cup of tea, is big pieces. But it's pretty cool. Right now, with the the COVID restrictions, our classes are at half capacity. But I was able to find a way to go around that because we have front and a back studio. So I was able to divide the class up and keep us going, which is pretty cool. So, and very inspiring, if you ask me, to be able to offer that to our students, because a lot of them find that ceramics is their cup of tea for therapy, if you will. So let's go ahead and head on back through the green hallway. We're going to stop by my office very briefly, if you will. My office is kind of tore up as I took a lot of the artwork out of it.
Is that
to be able to
made
show
here?
off to you guys. So.
All this is what's made here?
Yeah, stuff like this. So this was actually a ceramics conference that took place 2017. So called in Sika, and when you go through there, there's just vendor after vendor after vendor. It's probably very similar to, what is that large convention that usually takes place for, like TAMCO kickoff and different things like that are in the spray ground world, if you will. It's very similar to that, but for clay. And this is just one of the posters they hand them out, if you will, out there, and I grabbed a whole bunch of different ones. So you'll find stuff like this that's actually created within the center. Clay to me is the almighty, if you will. And I'll kind of talk about that a little later on too, where I love it because it has a tactile function where I can create the piece, if you will, my underlying canvas, and explore that in many ranges, if you will. So we're heading through the studio. We're gonna come on through to the left right here. You're gonna see my office. It is all over the place, full of crazy stuff. I love toys, as you can see. I've never grown up. I'm still a kid at heart, and I think that keeps me full. So, and obviously there's other things in there. It's a constant reminder for me of seeing work from my beginning to where I'm currently at in my office. So some of the stuff that I have in here is all the way from like high school, 9th grade, to current work that I may normally have on display, if you will. And it's good for me to be able to take that out and bring it out to students and show them, like, look, you know, it's not about getting this overnight. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen over time. If you want it, you got to chase that dream and make it happen. So it's really good to be able to pull that out, because each time you pull out a piece, you'll feel it, and there'll be a difference in that piece, whether it was learning shape and form or having it become lighter. And your goal was just simply that, or better glazing. So it just depends on what your ultimate technique and goal was. But usually my office is very intriguing to people, because it's not your normal city office, that's for sure. Because remember, we're in a city entity, a city building, so to have an office like that is outside the norm, but we're in an art center, so nothing is outside the norm, right? So we're coming into the back here. This is the second half of the studio, if you will. I consider the studio the whole center, if you will. So front studio and then back center, or back studio, if you will. Usually these shelves are full of what we call bisqueware, and that's a stage in the pottery process where it goes from being soft mud. We take it through these electric kilns, and they fire them to cone 08, and that's a ceramic term, if you will, cone 08. When anything is referred to as a cone, that's referring to a vague temperature. That temperature is actually 1900 to 1830, somewhere between there, so pretty hot. That makes it a soft stone. At that point, you can then actually take it to a glazing process, and that glaze adheres to it like a sponge, and then you fire it again to a higher temperature, and then you have finished ware. So you'll actually see some of my finished pieces in the ceramics side of things, if you will. So yeah, definitely. So you're seeing Scott-based run equipment. I like Scott. Scott is a fantastic brand, if you will. Remember too, you know, that as we're going through the studio, you guys are visiting me in kind of like an art term in general, I think. But you guys are probably really intrigued by the fact that, you know, the airbrushing side of things. And that's not my forte. My forte is actually ceramics. So that's why we're going through a ceramics studio, to show you kind of my background knowledge and where I'm coming from and how I bring that into the incorporation of, you know, using the airbrushes. So yeah,
no,
Scott Kilns.
We follow your social media, so I've seen a bunch of your ceramic actual posts.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love knowing that. So as you come back through the studio, you'll see the glazing table that takes place, the ware shelves. There's normally shelving that's full over here stuff. And then normally you'll be able to see it kind of like the front, but the back also has 11 potter's wheels also. It also hosts all the glazes for the studio. There's about 14 hiding behind all these large paintings, and there's quite a few still hidden underneath here. And we have raku glazes. And if you take a quick glance at the, you know, the glaze wall, as I refer to it, Bicentennial hosts a total of 41 different surface treatments, is how I refer to it. And bisque, as we were talking about, is a soft stone. And this is a great example of bisqueware. It's clay, right? So mud that has been fired to that temperature. That clay then turns into a soft stone. So you can kind of hear that scratchiness. I refer to it as like a sponge. From that point, we then apply the glaze to it, and then we take it back outside, and we're going to go out to our kiln yard here briefly. The kiln yard, all of our glazes go up from this point over, are considered a high fire reduction studio here. We'll take a look at that.
Sounds really light.
It is. It's very light, depending on how you throw or what you do. It will determine the clay, if it's light or heavy. And some of the pieces you'll see that we can pick up of mine, they're definitely heavy, and then other pieces are very light. So it just depends on what you're doing. But all the glazes that we have are cone 10 fired reduction, if you will. So that temperature refers to cone 10. It's actually 2,350 degrees. When I fire off that kiln, I starve the kiln of oxygen. So it's called a reduction environment. That causes all the colors that you see in the glazes. The beautiful and really intriguing thing to me about the glazing process is that you can layer A over B. So you can take one glaze and another glaze, and you have a whole new glaze. And if you flip it, so if you go B over A, now you have a whole nother glaze. Or if I just take 50% of this glaze and 50% of this glaze and mix them, I have a whole nother glaze. So when you have a wall of 42 options and you start layering things with just doubles, you have a lot of options. Then if you layer maybe a third combo into that, like A, B, and C, you have even more. So that to me is where I get really excited thinking about ceramics, because your options are just pretty much endless. All of our glazes here are food safe, meaning they don't leach out any kind of toxic stuff. I do make them all, so I know exactly what's in them. They're proprietary glaze recipes, if you will. Raku is something really fun because when you do it, you get results now. So you actually take this piece up, you glaze it, you put it into a kiln, and you pull it out with tongs at 1930 degrees. It's like melting metal, and you drop it into a can of combustibles, and that combustible material soaks in, causes colors to appear from carbon, and that's what you see here is the carbon trapping that takes place in the glaze. But those are not food safe, so they're decorational pretty much.
May I ask, one of your artworks is the butterfly on a piece of wood or something? It's like burnt with all the different colors as the glaze as well?
Yep, that was actually a raku piece. So funny story behind that very briefly is I have been trying to get that piece accomplished, if you will, a total of 7 times. That was for my daughter. I had been trying for 7 years pretty much to get this piece. I was going to give it to her every single time on her birthday. It's just a piece for her. So the butterfly actually had Lily's name on it, and I can't remember if the final one I had finished had Lily under it or not, but it was for my daughter. And the interesting thing is ceramics is not quite like airbrushing in my experience. You never get a solid, dependable answer to come out of the kiln. You can't go and think that you're going to have it finished and conclude with an answer every single time that's going to be the same. That's something I like chasing. I call it the mad scientist syndrome for me, because I'm always chasing that. Like, can I control something? And I love that theory of being able to try to control and understand something. So I'm constantly seeking that answer, if you will. And I've kind of experimented a little bit more in pushing that line with the ceramic side of things and doing more underglazing, which we'll talk about too. But briefly invite you in so you can see where all the magic happens of all these glazes. So this is what we call the chemical room. Not very many people get access to this chemical room. You guys are more than welcome to step foot in there. It is pretty clean right now. The chemical room is more than less just minerals that we pull out of our earth. So you could literally go to the mountains. Good example of that is I went to, where was it? Moab. Last summer, and on the side of the road I just pulled over, and I knew by looking that I could see there was green stuff all over the side of the road, and I was like, oh, that's either probably chrome or copper or something along those lines. So I grabbed some of that stuff, took a ball mill to it, smashed it up, and sure enough, it's raw copper material. So I mean, this stuff is found all over, you know, it's mined, if you will. So when you start mixing these chemicals, as we refer to them, together, that's when you get glazes. So I have to understand the science side of things to make all that magic happen. So this is my mad scientist room, if you will.
Okay, and this is little like a sample oven here?
Yep, so all of these things are kilns that you're seeing back over here on the side. Those kilns pretty much will reach any temperature that we said from the 2000 degree mark and down to whatever you would like to go to. Some of the pieces that we'll have out on the table that we'll talk about later with underglazes through them, those were actually fired in these, what they call test kilns. It's usually about $14 to fire off one of those larger kilns, which is not terrible, but you only get so much life out of a kiln. Just like anything, they're driving tires or something, you're going to wear it out as you use it. The kiln is the same way. They're full of electronic parts inside that heat up, takes thermal wear, if you will, and tear. And as that happens, you know, you only get so much life out of that kiln. So from that point, it's just a matter of, you know, replacing the elements as needed inside those. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Those things are, 2 of them are mine, 2 of them are the city's. A lot of test pieces, a lot of testing is what we'll do inside of those kilns to get an answer. You know, is that glaze working properly? Is it doing what I need? Or when I finish off a piece and I want to see that piece and I don't have the patience to wait, I will fire it off in one of those kilns rather than waiting to get it through a very large kiln like this kiln. So Bicentennial is very unique because the center hosts, like I said, a reduction firing kiln, if you will, okay? Not very many public settings in Colorado have that opportunity. I can think of maybe 2 other studios, local studios, that offer reduction firing cone 10. It's kind of like the lost technique. Everyone wants to go to cone 6, which is a little lower. It's like 2237 or something, some number. I don't fire there, so I don't know it. But it's kind of a lost technique, and it's more traditional to where pottery may have originated, if you will. There's a lot of speculation. Where does it originate? It's hard to know. I'm not too much of a history buff on that side. I love the current creation process, and that's where I'm at with my work. But as far as the reduction, I love it. This is a gigantic kiln. This is probably one of the biggest in this state. Cooper Works is who makes this kiln. As far as exact dimensions on this kiln, I can't tell you because that's not really important to me. They would be able to tell you, but I'm not too concerned about it. All I'm concerned about is how much work can I fit inside of this kiln, and that would be about 2,000 to 3,000 pieces, depending on the size of the wear. You know, if you, let's say you take a size of your camera and put it in there a couple times, how many cameras can I fit in there? And I'll load based off of stacks and shelves, and I'll build it up, and then I close it up, and then I'll fire it, and that takes about 14 hours to 16, depending on Mother Nature, if you will, and how she'll help or hinder the firing process. Barometric pressure will play a good part in the firing process. So if, like cloud covering rolls in or something, it'll change how it fires. It takes about 2 to 3 days to cool the kiln down. You get your work out, and you have beautiful pieces, if you will. So this is pretty cool. High fire cone 10 kiln. I call it the city's Cadillac that they let me drive, which is kind of funny. It costs about $45,000 for that kiln, and you'll get about 10 years if you take care of it. Out of there, it's on its 3rd year right now, so it's fairly new, if you will. Then we have the raku kilns that we talked about briefly with those glazes, and that's another Cooper kiln. That's a homemade Bade kiln, if you will. Fit larger raku pieces inside of that one, and then this is literally the same as what you see there, but smaller, less thermal, fabric on the inside, so it doesn't hold the temperature, so you can't go as hot as fast. And then this is a top hat where you actually crank it up and it lifts up. So, and then we have another small kiln, which is next to the large one, and that's to be able to test fire some of those test tiles in there quick and get answers. So if a student, we were talking about, if you mix glazes, you can come up with new results, but let's say that student accidentally dunks from one glaze into another and chunks of the glaze fall off in a bucket. Now you've what we call contaminated that entire bucket, and it's a whole new glaze. And if someone comes to me and says, hey, that glaze isn't working right, that's when I'll fire it off, find out what's going on, try to chemically fix it if I can. If not, we just call it a new contaminated glaze, and we go through the bucket until it's done. A bucket of glaze can run anywhere from $50 to make to, I think our most expensive glaze is called Poseidon Blue. It contains a fair amount of cobalt in it. Cobalt is found in both your guys' electronic devices. So it's very expensive to buy cobalt. For 1 pound, it's $100 of cobalt. So there's a container in there that costs about $1,000, and it's not a very big container. But in that glaze bucket, it's got $400 price tag next to it to make that bucket. So it's a very beautiful dark glaze.
Students, they mostly local, or they travel all over the country to come here and...
The farthest student that I've had travel is from Colorado Springs to take classes here. I've never really had students come from like around the world necessarily to take classes here. And I think it might be just because most of our classes run at 6 weeks term, if you will, and they meet once a night, once a week for usually 3 hours, a night, which is really not a whole lot of time when you stop and think about it, to invest into 3 hours into a piece of artwork. You need to really do more outside of it. So if you don't have like a residency here in, somewhere close, it makes it kind of difficult to keep, practicing, if you will, and getting better at what you're doing. So, because I always tell people, if you want to get good, at throwing, because throwing just doesn't happen. It's kind of like riding a bicycle. I tell everyone that you're going to fall and fall and fall. The more you fall, every time, if you look at it as a lesson, you're eventually going to be able to ride. Okay, you got that figured out. Then, okay, you want to start riding with doing tricks, like maybe riding with no hands on the handlebars. You're going to fall again. So every time you excel to a new level, and you want to adventure to that next level, you still have to fall again to get there. And literally, your work will fall. And I mean that literally. When you're throwing on the wheel, your piece will collapse on you. When you're throwing on the wheel, which is kind of one of my fortes, if you will, like this cup here is throwing on the wheel. As you're doing that, it's a water management. Everything in clay, so all of the clay here is water-based. It's not an oil-based product, so it's literally water added to the clay particles. And if you add too much water, it'll fall down, it'll slump, it'll crack. There's all kind of problems that can occur throughout the process. So it's kind of fun, like I said, to play that mad scientist, to kind of work through those dilemmas, if you will, when you're creating.
That was actually my next question. Is it local production, this cup?
This is me right here.
Okay.
So everything you're going to see out in this back room right now, this is all me. This piece is actually a all me piece all the way around. So the only thing that I did not make is the clay. So we source our clay from a local supplier, if you will. But this is a Bade underglaze actually too. So, and I'll kind of talk about that very briefly. Some of the cups that are on the table, I used a commercial underglaze. And as I ventured into doing some things, I realized that the company, it just didn't quite fit with my motto. They gave me some feedback on something when I showed them what their stuff could do. And I was like, I just wanted you to see what it could do. And I won't name anybody, but it kind of broke my heart a little bit, you know, because I wanted to show them that their product could be airbrushed is really what I was chasing. So this Predator piece right here, if you look, this Predator mug, that is by this, that is by me, it's created by me, but it also has this underglaze on it. It's a commercial underglaze, very popular company, very popular product, pretty darn good product if you ask me. And that was my first ever experience airbrushing ever. And I used the airbrushed underglaze through there. So it's, you know, airbrushing to me was something that I really wanted to dive into because I knew that I could get soft gradients. And as you can see on him, to get that fleshy look, I was able to use the airbrush, you know, and then obviously incorporating the use of like a brush to get some of the line work in him, but really it was all airbrush. And that was my first time I'd ever touched an airbrush. Cheap airbrush, you know, $13 airbrush. Didn't know what I was getting myself into, but fell in love with it. And then from that point, showed it off and was like, oh, you know, let's see what happens. I didn't get a good response out of the company with their product. And I thought I need to come up with my own product, something that will work exactly like I want, something that'll perform the way I want it to perform. And that's where I came up with my Bade underglaze recipe. And that's pretty much what you're seeing on this cup, that cup, this plate. So it's something that it can flow through an airbrush so much more smoother than the commercial product. It's much more reliable. It starts out as a white base and then I'm able to add colorants to it and then fire it, and it's more reliable because I could take it to a hotter temperature and not have problems. Like this commercial one, if I take it up to a cone 10, it'll bubble and blister, and that's a problem. You know, if I want something like this, which is cone 6, all these pieces are cone 6 that we're looking at as far as the underglaze on them, but it just, the color kind of burns out. And that's a problem to me. I want something that's vibrant, poppy, flashy, you know, has the consistency that I'm looking for. So that was my first endeavor with airbrushing, was running it through you know, underglaze through an airbrush, which is pretty cool. We actually have a piece back here that is still, it's a blank canvas. And that's my ultimate goal, is to airbrush back on that piece. So.
Yeah. How long ago was it, the first airbrush experience?
4 years ago. Had never picked up an airbrush, so that was that first piece. And really it's very simple, you know. This piece, if you take a look at it, so the gradient that you're seeing, I knew that I was not able to dry brush. So from the work that's around the room, you can see I have an understanding of like painting in general. My dad is a painter, heavily influenced by him. He's the reason for me being an artist, to put it simple. And that's actually his cup that he let me borrow. It was his Father's Day present, but back to this one. To get that gradient, I knew I couldn't do that by dry brushing, especially with underglaze. It doesn't work like watercolor, even though I refer to it as kind of like a watercolor essence. It doesn't work that way. You can't fade out or fuzz the product because it's a dry material, and as soon as you wet it back out, I can actually move it, but it will move away from the clay. So it'll almost stain it, if you will. And that's not what I wanted. So I knew I needed to get a gradient skin tone. Okay, well, I needed to learn how to pick up an airbrush. And the first time I did it, had no clue what I was doing. You know, hooked up a compressor in the garage, ran the cord inside my house, did it in the kitchen table, and blew underglaze all over my mom and dad's kitchen table. They were freaking out. But hey, I got a great product out of it, right? And then from there, adding, you know, the underglaze back in, detail and stuff on it. But he's probably one of my most prideful pieces as far as a cup, a tankard, if you will, to drink out of. It's pretty cool. Love Predator, love that kind of stuff.
Made by hand?
Oh yeah, yep. Shape? So you're looking at a wheel thrown piece. Starts out just like, you know, a cup, if you will, throwing on the wheel. And then from there, I took it and started sculpting on it. So adding clay. And that's one of the things I love about clay is you can add and subtract. You can put stuff on. If you don't like it, peel it off. And if you don't like it still, crush it up and restart again, you know, and get a new piece of clay out. And that's where I really love the versatility of clay, because it's just got so many options. You know, I can create a canvas that's 3-dimensional. Literally, I can pick up this piece inside, you know, around the bottom, everything, and it's got something there. And that is really cool. That's the only thing that bothers me about 2D art, if you will, is it's there. You know, it's frontal usually, which is great. And I love the idea of trying to create that 3-dimensional look to a 2D piece, but 3D, literally, that's how my brain thinks. I try to think in a 3-dimensional aspect, if you will, even when I'm painting on a 2D panel or canvas or whatever the, you know, substrate may be, if you will. So he's pretty cool. He's one of my most prideful pieces because we'll have to check this out later, but he's actually got a UV glaze on him. Okay. So an ultraviolet glaze, and you can't see it right now. It's absorbing the light for us, but I came up with my own personal UV glaze on here. So he actually glows predator green blood on him if you take him into a dark room. So it's pretty cool. We could show you if you want real quick. You want to see? So you'll have to follow me. So we're just going to go into this other room. It's like a dark hole, if you will, in there. But since this piece is figured out, you know, and absorbed a lot of light, we'll be able to take this piece and it's going to glow.
Oh yeah.
So that's actually glaze on there. And that's pretty rare. You're not really going to see that anywhere in the ceramics world. There's only 2 people that I know of that are playing with that, myself and the person that helped me get to the point of understanding how to make that happen. It's pretty cool. So
interesting. It's much brighter in the camera than I can see it visible around.
Well, and it's interesting how your lights will adjust and how it will adjust to as it sits here out of the light. You know, if it was in direct light for quite some time, it glows pretty significantly. But it's pretty cool because it's glazed. So I mean, I can run this through a dishwasher, you know, drink off of it, whatever the case is. And it's there, but it's that hidden element, if you will. And I like that in my work. I like to surprise a person, if you will. So when, you know, like if you're at a party, let's say, Halloween party, you're drinking with this and you go into a dark room and all of a sudden it's glowing. That's cool. That's that surprise element. And I like that in my ceramic work, if you will. I like that surprise element to take place. So it's pretty cool. It's one of my most favorite pieces, if you will.
It's scary for me.
He is scary, huh?
If you don't mind me asking, how long?
You can totally pick it up. He's going to be heavy because I didn't subtract a whole lot, but...
How long something like that can take your time? How much time you invest in this?
Okay, so I've learned over the course of especially airbrushing to stop counting hours because artwork doesn't pay by hour.
Yes,
it doesn't work. And that's a hard thing. I was foolish enough to remember to count all my hours when I made that. I was like in love with the, oh wow, I spent this much time today. Oh, I did this much. So throwing it, I don't want to say trained, but I trained myself to learn to throw very fast and efficiently. Because in the pottery world, you can't charge a whole lot of work for clay pieces. People just don't pay for it, in my opinion, like they should. Because you can go to a local store, hobby store, Walmart, Target, any of those places, and pick up just any coffee cup. Why would you pay $300 for a coffee cup that's got 30 hours of painting into it when I can go to just a store and have someone that maybe printed something off of it with a laser machine, decal machine, anything like that, and it cost me $20? You got to find the right person, right? However, I do remember I spent 82 hours on that piece. So throwing, I can throw very quick. I can pull a mug off the wheel. So if you were to take the handle off this piece, the basic form and the basic shape, this has got what I call a fake foot in it. So Artem, if you want to pick up maybe that other one and show the foot, or I can even just tilt this one too. It doesn't have a real foot carved into it. This is what I call a production mug, if you will. It's got a foot that doesn't recess in. And same thing with that one. It's just bumped upward, if you will. I can pull a mug off the wheel in 3 minutes, start to finish. That's like everything. Centering, pulling, throwing it up, you know, concluding the shape. Pulling the handle or extruding it, that may be another 2 or 3, maybe 5 minutes attaching it. So really the actual creation of a mug, I can do very quickly. In the ceramic world, a standard mug with standard glaze on it will probably run you 25 to 45 bucks, depending on your level of where you fall in the industry of popularity, honestly. Or how bad a person wants your piece. You know, if it's custom made, it's going to run you a little bit more. It's that simple. I like diving on the custom side of things. So you're going to see that I like to dive in and spend a lot of time. You know, like that predator head, I spent 80 hours. So A lot of that time came from the process of dealing with the material. That piece is out of porcelain. Porcelain is very finicky. It is like the crown jewel of clay. It's like the white gold, if you will, of metals. And it's temperamental. It'll crack, it'll warp, it'll bend, it'll shatter. It will do all kind of really radical stuff. And you got to be very kosher in like nudging it to do what you want, is a good way to put it. Like suggestive hints, you know, I want you to do this, clay. And that's how that works. So a lot of it was sitting there carving, adding pieces, looking at the reference photos, you know, pulling clay off, adding that kind of stuff. So about 80 hours between the whole process, between the sculpture of that piece into the actual glazing, hand painting glazes and airbrushing onto that piece too.
It's interesting. So the clay is one of the oldest materials probably used by the humans. It's still so popular. All the sport cars you designed first in clay and get in shape out there. And at the same time, it's one of the best ways to save it for years. I mean, people see those museum pieces which are 2,000, 3,000 years old and still look fine. And versus, you know, the canvas, which still eventually, if it's not proper temperature and everything else,
it's going to kind of deteriorate. And that's one of the things that I like about the clay. You know, I talked briefly about the idea that I think that I like thinking in three-dimensional. I also like the idea that it's a tangible object that's going to be here with permanence. And that's also kind of something to think about, because whatever you create, it's going to be here beyond my time, beyond my daughter's time, beyond someone else's time. I mean, you were just talking about pieces that are in a museum 2,000 years old. That's the same thing. One of these pieces could get dropped, broken, crushed. You throw it into a landfill, it's not going away. It will be here, you know, until probably the end of time. And that is something to really think about, you know. It puts me in a mindset to where I really stop and think about, what am I creating? Is it worthy, if you will? And I don't like creating just pieces that are, I consider throwaway pieces, you know, that are like, doesn't have that time and that heart and that soul put into it. I like creating work where I know I'm going to put some time into it. So detail oriented, if you will.
Okay, now my curiosity. I know how, basically I don't know anything about, you know, the ceramic process and how you build out of clay. But I can get and imagine how you do a little cut like that. What about a piece, or even I think it's longer than your arm? How you pull up something like that? How's it done? Well,
we'll start real briefly on these smaller ones. So something like that, it's about 10, 15 pounds of clay. You can handle that on the wheel, no big deal. The most I've ever thrown was 52 pounds at one time. And the plate in the lobby that you guys seen when you came in, Bicentennial, hangs over the water fountain, that's a 52-pound plate. I did that for a pottery challenge in the ceramic world, if you will. There was this challenge going around, and I was like, you know, they wanted to do a 20-pound challenge. And I was like, well, 20 pounds is cool, but if it's a challenge, I'm going to challenge myself. So I stepped it up and I did a 52-pound platter. So I can handle a fair amount of clay. A lot of that has to do with just my overall size. You know, smaller, petite people, it's a little bit more difficult for them to throw larger. But with the right skill set, the right teacher, the right mindset in just learning how to handle the clay, anybody can throw a very large amount of clay. So if you're going to throw a larger amount, 10 pounds of clay is quite a bit of clay. You know, you got to know how to center the clay. That's the hardest part. So the trickery here is that you throw it in sections. Okay, so the largest that I've ever pulled a piece was 32 inches in itself, you know, and that's pretty impressive out of a piece of clay, because the clay, remember, as we talked about, as it gets wet, it slumps, it starts to fall, it sags, it kind of gets like pot belly at the bottom and hangs down, if you will. So you gotta keep the heat or underwork the clay, if you will, to get it to stay standing up, right? So you break it down in sections. So really, this vase would be a great example next to this large piece. So this piece, when it was wet, before we fired the first time, weighed 110 pounds. That's wet weight. Right now it probably weighs about 70, 80, something like that. So you lose quite a bit of weight. You also lose some height. Clay shrinks, which is also detrimental to a potter, if you will, because you're like, I have this vase, you know, and it's impressive, and it's up here, and you get it out of the first firing, and now it's down here. I'm like, where did it go? You know? But that's also really cool to be able to do that. So back to the whole point here, I easily get distracted to you guys. I love it. I'm like the squirrel syndrome. So as you start throwing, I'll throw a section about yay high, somewhere between there. And this space next to this one is a good example because it's hard to distinguish my sections within this space. This one, you can see them. So if you look at this one, you've got section 1 right here. You can see a defined line. Section 2 right here. Section 3, and then section 4 will take you all the way up to what we call the shoulder of a pot, and then the neck and the head of the piece, if you will, is section 5, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way. And each one of these spherical rings, if you will, is a coil that was then laid on the piece and then thrown outward to get that effect, if you will. So it's all about knowing how to kind of trick the viewer, if you will, into thinking, wow, you did that out of one piece. Well, yes, I did. You know, and that's just part of it. Does it mean that it's any less tangible in my book? No. There are some potters that kind of feel like if you didn't do it out of one piece of clay, you're just showing off. It's not even about that for me. I love big products. I love something that has substance. And like I said, if I'm going to make something that's permanent and be around for a while, I want it to be impressive. I want someone to look at it and have a wow factor. You know, something well beyond my time where someone like my daughter or buyer, if you will say, you know, I'm proud to have this, you know, and it takes up space, let it take up the space that it deserves, if you will. So.
All right, finalize the ceramic part of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to call this being a mug or a cup. It's an art piece.
Yeah.
Have you ever used it as a cup?
Yes. Yep. It was my daily, I call it a daily driver for quite some time. I would sit in my office and I'd have my morning coffee in it. Same thing with any one of these cups like this one. Well, I drink out of it. I always break them into, before if I have a piece like this, it's meaningful to me. Like I said, I gave this one to my father for Father's Day. I had to make sure it worked right, you know, so I tested out before. That's important, I honestly think, because if you're going to hold it, it's got to feel right in the hand, you know. Every person that picks up a piece is going to have a different sense how they feel about holding it. It's also got to feel good to the lips. If it's not good to the lips, it's not going to be used quite frequently. So this one I more or less put on display now. I don't drink out of it very often. If I go to like a Halloween party, you bet your butt I'm going to show up to a Halloween party with it. However, it also gets stowed away very quickly because as people consume beverages, I'm worried about it, including myself. It's kind of heavy, so it's not exactly, it's like the Thor hammer, you know, you got to walk around and carry it. So it's a show statement, if you will.
Is it dishwasher safe?
Yeah, yep. All the ceramics that I have in here, you can dishwasher safe it. I would recommend not dishwashing that piece. You know, I would hand wash it just because I just don't want to take a chance with anything. But any one of the cups that you see on the table that are, you know, underglazed, they're totally dishwasher safe, microwavable safe. You could even bake out of it. I don't know what you bake in your cup, but you could bake out of it. You can put it in the oven. It'll withstand thermal shock, if you will, too. So they are fun pieces. I really enjoy them.